Everything you're going to hear and watch in this video is something that I have known for a long time, and in real life, I have been sharing and preaching this to anyone who cares to listen. No matter how biased and woke you are, I want you to take three things out of this video, and that is number one, slavery has been going on in Africa long before the arrival of the white men. And number two, slavery wasn't a white-only thing. It was a two-way street. The French, the Arab, and the white slavers who purchased these slaves were as guilty as the black chiefs and black forefathers who raided their own villages and captured their own people and sold them into slavery. And number three, after all was said and done, it was still the white man who formally abolished and put an end to slavery. I would play the video in a few seconds, but before I do that, I want to quickly implore you to please subscribe to my channel and smash the like button as a way of encouraging me to make more videos. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
And now for a brief history of slavery. Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown. It existed before then. It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact, when the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner. Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day. Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were quickly followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. After centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice. That includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War. Now, am I saying that this makes white people better than anyone else? Of course not. My purpose here is to simply tell the truth, and the truth is that human history is complicated. No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless. Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous Persian Empire or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America or the heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few. Instead, we're told that slavery is a white phenomenon. And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media, I come across extraordinary depictions about how Africans lived like pharaohs before Europeans came and laid waste to their paradise. I wish any of this were true, but it's not. It's a fantasy. The truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other black Africans, and in many cases, sold for items as trivial as gin and mirrors. Whites didn't go into the interior and round up the natives. They waited on the coast for their black partners to bring them black bodies.
Now ponder that. It was as though we weren't valued by our own forefathers. Our forefathers thought our lives were worthless and insignificant as compared to the mirrors and alcohol they received in exchange for selling us. I want you to understand the situation. It wasn't as though the slave buyers raided African lands, started fighting a war with Africans in their land, and upon defeating the Africans, they took them back to Britain, America, and France as slaves. No, this wasn't what happened. What actually transpired was these slave buyers came to Africa. They negotiated with African chiefs and leaders to give them slaves for labor in exchange for some items. Then these African chiefs declared war on various weaker African villages, defeated these weaker communities and captured their brothers in these communities and sold them to the highest bidder as slaves. Our ancestors were not only materialistic and greedy, but they also didn't value our lives as human beings.
The stark reality is that our lives had very little value to our ancestors. Here's the third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700,000 slaves in Africa today, right now. That's the lowest estimate that I could find. Other sources say there are many more. For context, that's almost twice as many slaves as were ever brought to the United States. Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor, these are the conditions that currently exist within the same sub-Saharan region where the transatlantic slave trade originated. African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then, and no, they are not being purchased by any country of white men. In fact, slavery, by any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries. But we hear almost nothing about that. Just like we hear nothing about how slavery was universal until good people in Europe and America ended it 2 centuries ago. Why? Because our so-called leaders, black and white, wouldn't profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable. It elects politicians and funds racial grievance groups. And if Black Americans began to view themselves as partners in the American dream, if we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all men are created equal, the patriotic spirit that is our real heritage, then the race hustlers would soon be out of business. And who wants that? I'm Candace Owens, author of Blackout for Prager University.
Please don't ever fail to subscribe to my channel and like this video so that it will get a wide distribution, because I want many African Americans to see this video because they need it. Many African Americans are in the dark as to the main story behind slavery. I don't know if this is so because they chose to disregard the truth and believe lies, or they are in the dark because they are using their ignorance as a coping mechanism. You know, it's like they feel better and comforted if they keep believing that the blame totally lies with the white men. They can't confront the reality that comes with knowing that your forefathers didn't think you were as valuable as some cheap items like comb, a mirror, and alcohol, and the fact that none of your ancestors made an attempt to bring you back to Africa. None of them built a single ship and tried to bring you back home. The truth remains that African slavery would not have been possible had our forefathers not encouraged and actively played their part in it. It seems like everyone is so concerned about slavery simply because the white man was involved, even though history has repeatedly shown that it was not just the white men who practiced slavery. We had the African slave masters, the Arabian slave masters, the French slave masters, the Egyptian, the Persian slave masters. In fact, even in today's day and age, slavery is openly and widely practiced in the Middle East and in Africa. I have seen several documentaries of Africans being shipped off to Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, Jordan, Oman, etc. These African women were promised respectable jobs, but when they arrive the Middle East, they find themselves working as housemaids, their passports confiscated, and they become subjected to the worst working conditions ever. Most of these African women were not allowed to leave their employer's home. They were forbidden from socializing. Their cell phones were taken from them. They practically get ostracized from the world. They spend every single minute of their life mopping toilets or cleaning walls until their contract is completed. I don't even want to mention the horrors of molestations and sexual abuse these African women endure in the hands of their Arab employers. Another example is the pandemic of Africans like Nigerians, Ghanaians, Cameroonians, etc. entrapping their daughters and sisters into prostitution abroad. These naive African women get promised a better life and good job abroad by their trusted friends abroad, but when they arrive their destinations, they discover that they have been sold as prostitutes by their own fellow Africans. It is really sad, but no one is talking about that because white men are not involved. I was born and bred in Nigeria, and I can confidently tell you that there are very few wealthy Nigerian families who don't own a maid or a house help. I'm not in any way saying that having a maid is not acceptable, but I'm trying to make you understand how maids are typically designed in Nigeria. The maid scenario in Nigeria usually involves a rich family who goes to the village to get a maid. This maid is usually an innocent child from a poor home from as young as 8 or 9 years old. Now, when these kids are brought to the city, their entire fate depends on the wealthy family that took them in. Most of these kids are made to endure the worst form of torture from their master or their madam. These kids most times don't ever see the four walls of a classroom. Their life becomes a chess in the hands of their wealthy owners. What about the issue of human trafficking that is prevalent in Africa, with Africans hunting and killing fellow Africans just to harvest their vital organs as a way of making money? All these and many forms of slavery are existing and thriving today in Africa, yet everyone seems to be outraged about the slavery that Africans have helped to perpetrate, which, by the way, was ended hundreds of years ago by white people. It is high time we get accustomed to what truly transpired in history and look for ways to find common ground in this whole issue. I understand that the white man is not innocent as far as slavery is concerned, but on the other hand, I also know that some of our forefathers were not victims, but perpetrators. Thanks for watching this video, and do well to subscribe, like, and share. As always, you guys know that I don't know much. I just speak.